Summer in Lost Ark is back again, and that means the topic of what class you should make is in the air again. So, like the clap, I'm back in town to let you know which classes are topping the current meta. Like always, I would like to remind you that on equal scale, most, if not all of these, will perform well if you have the skill. In this iteration of the video, it will be broken down into 3 sections. The first will look at the top 15 strongest classes in Lost Ark based specifically on median DPS data for both normal mode and hard mode Gate 2 Brel. This time around, we will compare the standings to the last balance patch to see improvements or fall-offs, each with hundreds of parses to back the data up. The following section will look at classes that had the wildest meta increases or decreases based specifically on the balance patch that was received and the current one in our region. And the last section will just be a brief look at the whole list and a few easy picks for any new players who want something safe to start with. I will be using data compiled by Uwu in partnership with Loa Logs. For those unaware, Loa Logs is a third-party meter that a majority of Western Lost Ark players use to measure their damage or support uptime. These logs, if opted into, get uploaded to their servers anonymous or named based on the settings you choose. These are then pulled by Uwu to make these graphs for us to peruse. I'll be comparing hard mode Brel Gate 2 median DPS with an eye level specification of 1690 to 1700 to weed out the giga whales, and 1670 as a base for normal mode. I wouldn't look too heavily at normal as a basis, especially when comparing the 2 different balance patches, since things like Rymeria's new Bloodclaw map skews this a lot, but it's there to give an idea for you new players of where you will find yourself. Enough yapping, into the data. We'll look at hard mode first since it's the better baseline, then rapid fire normal mode as you will see some repeats there. Starting at number 15 on hard mode median charts, we have Taijutsu Scrapper. Tai actually sees a loss of 7 spots since the last time. The changes to the class with the balance patch wasn't too noteworthy from a negative aspect it seems, as it mostly got small damage tweaks to its skills. This may be more shock related, so this looks more like power creep from the others. This is a back attacker, but one of its arc passive side nodes gives free back attacks in the burst state for like 5 seconds, which has made the class both easier to pilot but also more enjoyable. Next up, at rank 14, we have Enhanced Weapon Deadeye. This also saw a slight dip since the last balance patch, and this seems quite literally only in relation to power creep, as the only changes it saw were stagger changes on its skills. This class is still considered one of the hardest to pilot well in the game, but a previous balance patch gave it some nice quality of life that has seen it flourish slightly. Still very hard to play as a back attacker. At 13, we have Phantom Beast Awakening Wild Soul, aka Crit Wild Soul. This actually sees a notable boost in normal mode and hard mode, with hard mode specifically increasing by plus 22 positions. It did see some balance changes on skills, mostly damage decreases on those skills, but I think the increase is probably more attributable to the class being relatively new when the balance was referenced previously, and a lot of this class's peak damage comes from hitting all 3 of its rotations in its cycle, which comes with comfort and understanding of it and the raid in general, which was also relatively new. The class is super easy to pilot, it just takes a bit to lock in on its 3 damage cycle. Now 12, Peacemaker Gunslinger. This class was one of the biggest winners going into tier 4 with its changes to its identity, and this balance saw it get a whole bunch of things that I can only say looks good since this is one of the few classes I have not much insight on. It saw a movement of plus 3 spots, fighting back on power creep and actually seeing an increase. This is a Hitmaster class that utilizes 3 weapons and is somewhat technical and squishy to pilot, but if you've got the hands and don't want to deal with being a positional class or burst, this may be the class for you. At 11, a personal shock to me, Reflux Sork. And more shocking, Igniter isn't even on this top 15 list for hard mode median damage. I did see a lot of notes for Sork here and a lot that look good, so I'm guessing most of these damage increases are for skills specifically Reflux uses. This may explain why the Sork in my static has been changing his only Sork roster from Igniter to Reflux recently. You can quote me saying Igniter Sork is never down bad for long on my last video, but this curveball with Reflux being meta is wild to me, and it is notable as it sees the second highest swing on the rankings with a plus 32 increase in its position. This is an uptime class and is built around swiftness, so if you want a somewhat high CPM caster that isn't locked to positional and somewhat glassy, Reflux Sork may be the choice. Top 10. We have the number 1 sleeper in the game, Perfect Suppression Shadowhunter. This shit has been meta for so long, it never gets mentioned as a good pickup over the regulars. It lost 4 positions since last time, but I think its biggest issue is some beef between a positional build and a Hitmaster variant, as there are a few of them in my Discord who are always mentioning the differences between the two. At number 9, we have EO Soul Fist. It loses 2 spots since the previous patch, but didn't see much change in the balance, though the hype damage decrease seems noteworthy, but not enough to drop it a notable amount. This is a difficult class to play, and most Soul Fists I know dropped it, but as mentioned last time, this class consistently bangs, especially its other spec, but that's another spoiler for later. The class with the most long-standing depression, but also the largest come-up with this patch. At number 8, we see Deathblow Striker with a plus 36 increase in the leaderboards for hard mode median damage. It doesn't have the longest balance patch notes segment, but was enough to skyrocket it to be meta notable. And this isn't even accounting for Mortem, which sees positionals go to the moon, and is why I'm not using that raid as a reference. It is a slow spec positional class, but its T-skill hits like a goddamn truck, and I hear the meta move is to not use LTS anymore. Don't know how I feel about ditching its most well-known move, if this is even the real tech that is. Rank 7. Barrage Artillerist. Barrage Artillerist got not the largest wall of text, but did see some notable tweaks to damage and cooldowns, notable enough to see it jump 25 spots in the rankings. This class builds meter, then goes into its wheelchair and just unloads. Rinse, repeat. This class has shields and a heavy tanking ability, which has made it a class that is hard to balance because it can offload lots of damage and tank big mechs at the same time. You're currently safe, but note sometimes this playstyle is problematic or a slight nerf tanks you for a few patches, but you gotta like what you like. Number 6. Lunar Reaper. Not the most exciting change, but it does see a plus 6 in position for median DPS rankings. I have heard a lot of people recently mention this class needs either a rework or a buff. Can't tell if they meant hunger or the class as a whole, but top 10 isn't too bad. It is definitely super glassy and a back attack positional class, fitting its assassin shadow archetype. I don't know how it fought power creep and gained a position with not even a mention in the balance patch. Maybe a new build helped it out. I don't know. I just work here. At number 5, Mayhem Berserker. This balance gave us faster skills, which made the rotation buttery smooth. The class saw a plus 7 increase in the leaderboards. This wasn't an overt damage increase, but the fact that the rotations can get off much smoother makes it much nicer to play. It has a lot of back attack skills, but is considered non-positional. But do note, it is a melee range class. I have swapped back to its Mana Forge build and am having a great time. And in form, it has great mobility. Next balance patch, we get more stuff. So shout out to whomever is playing Zerk at Smilegate and convincing them to constantly buff us. I'm up big. At number 4, we have Empress Arcana, the RNG card-carrying DPS that has a new powerhouse skill. All I hear is about this skill and assume it's the reason Empress is up here and Emperor is not. It gains 1 spot in the leaderboards for hard mode Brel, median DPS. It is very glassy, but if you are into this kind of class fantasy and have some hands, this may be the one for you. At number 3, we see the better Soul Fist spec, Robust Spirit. This class loses 1 spot since last time, but it still maintains its huge burst potential and is a top 3 spec in the current meta. Once again, a low population, but a large DPS output if you can adapt to its playstyle and time your burst right. At number 2, we see a large increase that comes down to one specific change. Deathstrike Sharpshooter saw a lot of quality of life with tier 4, but one of its notable annoyances maintained, though not being its top DPS skill anymore. Well, in this balance, DS got a largely reduced charge time on its snipe skill. This was one of my main reasons for going back to LC Sharpshooter because the charge time was so long and I always found myself getting pushed out of it. But now that this isn't a problem anymore, DS is eating very good, with an 8 position increase. If you saw old DS in tier 3, its new playstyle is reminiscent of the old, but is night and day on quality of life, and its damage output now is notable. I'm just waiting for the day that LC sees the light and ascends out of mediocrity, but it is so easy that I can't see that happening, but I will cope on. Now, for the class that is number 1 in median damage across hard mode Brel, Gate 2, of 50 plus options, the reigning champ, Ferality Wild Soul. Although it did get a nerf, the previous buff it received to compensate for players not adapting immediately to this class in Korea was so large, and even nerfing the ping benefits, it still remains the frontrunner. Although slightly more complicated than the crit variant, the spec transformation class of sorts hits like a truck if played well, and the median shows this. The Sork main in my static made a Wild Soul and was used using the crit variant. He changed his spec and there was a notable leap, and I mean leap, in the DPS output he was doing on the class. So this child maintains its reign as the #1 class in Lost Ark. We shall see soon if it receives another nerf, but I would imagine it has become less noticed because of how back attack classes dominate Mortem at the moment. We shall see soon though. Okay, let's speedrun this normal list. It is largely the same, but I will note the outliers. At number 15 we have Knight's Edge Soul Eater. This class has seen a somewhat fall off since it largely revolves around its large T skill and new Z identity skill at 80 Enlightenment. Both are seen more the better the player is at getting their rotation off clean. At 14 we have Pred Slayer. This class saw a recent large quality of life that allows you to leave form and only get a max of 10 stack penalty from this. Notably an 80 Enlightenment to get this leaving from form quality of life. Peacemaker again is at 13. 12 has BK Breaker. I'm kind of shocked it's this high based off the fall off of its median, since at 80 Enlightenment the skill to play effectively skyrockets. At number 11 we have RE Deathblade, a former king whom is rearing its dominant head in Mortem again. At 10 Empress Arcana. At 9 we have AT Scouter. This may be surprising to some that this class is so high. It may be more shocking that this is its position from a -8 from the previous patch. At 8 we have Asura, another former king who has fallen but will see the light again. At 7 we have Enhanced Weapon Deadeye. At 6 Wind Fury, a great class that barely got nudged out of the hard mode list. It saw some power creep and lost some spots. Super easy mobile class for new players. Top 5 we have Deathstrike again. 4 Igniter makes its presence known but not in hard mode, so that is very interesting. Crit Wild Soul lands at number 3 and maybe one of the best new player classes that I'll never recommend because how it's perceived. Mayhem at number 2. Ferality Wild Soul, shocker is number 1 here as well. Do note that normal mode's baseline is 1670 only and is skewed from last time since a majority of its data will be from people with at least 80 points of enlightenment. 1670 is a realistic level to get to somewhat soon with one character in an event, so I wanted new players to have a baseline on what they will look like when they get there. Okay, let's look at the top 10 most notable changes in hard mode Gate 2 Brel using eye levels from 1690 to 1700. There's no need to look at normal since the restriction was 1670 on eye level, and full enlightenment classes will put this in frenzy compared to mostly 77 enlightenment from before. The classes that saw the most gains and the most losses from this balance patch will be noted here to see the winners and the losers. At first, in hard mode, we see Deathblow Striker. I noted already that its tweaks from this balance saw it lose its depressive arc, and they are up big for the first time since 2022 Lost Ark with a plus 36 spot increase. At second, Reflux Sword, plus 32 spots because of this balance patch and maybe a new build. Sorks, a win is a win, you feel me? At third is Barrage with a plus 25 increase. Once again, its notable changes to identity and skills saw it see a great increase. At fourth, we have BT Zerk. I don't necessarily get why it fell so much, but it lost 25 spots. Most of the increased speed were on skills it would also use, so this is a bit baffling. Maybe everyone jumped ship to Mayhem since it became smooth like butter, or maybe it was just a victim of a lot of power creep all at once. Don't fret though, the next balance surges this class to the moon. At fifth, we have LC Sharpshooter. It technically got the speed buff on Snipe as well, but on LC it was already pretty quick, and the deep learning change was interesting. This class is so dookie, but it is in my main 6 since it's so chill to play, and its floor is giga high due to its bird doing most of its damage in its rotation. Its top end is just super low, and because of this, it succumbs hard to power creep, losing 24 spots. At 6 is Time to Hunt Gunslinger. I imagine Gunslinger players have prematurely swapped to TGH since the balance in Korea currently has it juiced to the moon, but we may not see that balance before it gets promptly nerfed from its broken ranking. Plus 23 is definitely notable though, maybe these changes in the patch gave it a notable juice already. At 7th we have Crit Wild Soul. As mentioned previously, it saw a plus 22 gain, and I think this entirely is on people getting used to its 3 burst rotation instead of just 2. At 8th we have Firepower Artillerist. Unlike its Barrage counterpart, it saw a loss of 19 positions in the rankings. The Firepower Artillerist in my static has it as his second favorite in his roster, so I have no idea why it fell so much. 9th has Punisher Slayer seeing a plus 18 jump in the hard mode rankings. This balance gave the class in general a great quality of life, but Punisher seems to be benefiting the most from it in regards to its specs. And 10th is Control Glaive. Pinnacle saw a notable loss in ranking, but Control is up. I got no guess on this one, friends. This went up plus 15. Let's take a brief look at the current balance patch rankings as a whole for both modes before I go over easy picks. This is mostly for those left off the ranks who want to see where their class stacks up against the others. I just want to highlight once more, as long as you adjust to the game and class, most, if not all the classes in an equal setting in Lost Ark can perform better than others based purely on the player's skill. Don't let this tier list dictate your choice, but let it help lock a decision at best. As you can see from the winners and losers section, balance patches can make or break classes in terms of their standings. So picking a class you don't like just because it's ranked higher is a setup for a future downfall. Now let's go over a few classes I think are fundamentally super simple to learn and play and are great for new and returning players. My first has been my go-to suggestion for first class pick for new players for years, the Demonic Impulse Shadow Hunter. It is a transformation class that does a small rotation out of form to build its identity meter, then presses Z to change into its demonic mode, and then unleashes as much damage as it can until its form runs out, then repeat. It saw some more additions to its rotation in Tier 4, and if played right with its super armor, is a monster of uptime. It is one of the easiest rotations and fundamentals to play in the whole game and does pretty decent. My next pick is for those of whom want a little bit more complexity, but it's really not much more. Wind Fury Aeromancer performs pretty well currently and really functions around rotating out shield creating skills into shield bursting skills and repeat, all whilst keeping its crit synergy up. This has a pretty airy feel to it and is super mobile, plus it offers a crit and movement synergy, which is one of the most ideal party synergies in the game. It is an but if you can get over that, it's still a great pick for new players. This next pick is for those of whom have no faith in their skills and just want a moving tank. Combat Readiness Gun Lancer, aka Blue Lancer, is quite literally a walking shield that takes next to no damage. Check any of my solo series with Mark, and most of the comments are annoyance that Mark can just immune everything. It technically has some positional aspect to it, but pop your shield and just make sure you get your damage amp out and then follow the rotation. The class becomes even more brain dead when you hit 1640 and have full enlightenment from Rhymeria and other horizontal, as 80 enlightenment doesn't require the damage amp anymore since it's perma up now. It doesn't have the most spectacular damage, but provides a lot of utility to the fight and puts the game quite literally in easy mode. I don't know exactly when this will go live, but we are on the precipice of a slight support rework. I don't know how that will look, but with self-meter headed to be in the game, support gameplay is looking easier for a new player to excel at. The support, at least currently, is the main DPS of sorts in a lobby, so them keeping their brand and damage buffs up as close to 100% is the goal, all whilst working your identity in there and supporting with shields or healing where you can. I used to tell people this was a cheat code to not get gatekept, but on the arrival of dual supports whom have DPS options, I imagine that avenue may not be as viable anymore. But with self-meter, you can work on your uptime and get better game by game. I would only recommend Paladin or Artist though. Bard is considered difficult to play optimally, but is considered peak if played well. Paladin, I would say, is the easier to play support because of how it can just push its buffs than shield in its Wi-Fi-like nature, whilst Artist is considered the fun to play support because of its abilities. There are many options that are easy, and I would recommend checking out my other videos on the subject if these 4 options aren't making you excited. If you have a great pick for easy to play classes, let us know in the comment section below. I hope this slight tweak on the format of this video worked. Check out my guides or my solo raid series with Mark, as solo A-Gear is near and Mark is worried about the day I bring him back to the game. Until next time, my name is EasyBreak. Toodaloo.